Some of the biggest question marks that I have regarding some of the Texas Longhorn starters for 2025. We discussed that. Some of the biggest question marks surrounding who will be in the starting lineup for the Texas Longhorns next season in 2025 on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, once again, the biggest question mark surrounding Texas Longhorn starters in 2025. This would probably have to be a two-part episode, just thinking like 20 to 30 minutes. If I'm talking about the player, if I'm asking the question, if I'm answering the question, it's not going to be every single starter, but assuming that I get to most of them, that probably would be a two-part episode. I'm just thinking through this right now in front of you. The wheels are turning. The little hamster inside my head is doing this right now, if you're watching on YouTube. So this may be a two-part episode. If you've been watching, thank you. You know what I'm saying? Like I've said many times, it's the off season. Still just trying to figure out, how to get up here and do content every day, what to talk about. So like I said, I'm just thinking right now, it's probably going to be a two-part episode. So we'll see. But yeah, biggest question marks surrounding the Texas Longhorn starters in 2025, right? Not necessarily question marks in terms of are they capable or anything like that. Just question marks in terms of how they'll be utilized, who they'll be replacing, things of that nature. But we'll figure that all out. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. First, a wellness check. I hope everybody's doing all right. Hope everybody's doing good. Hope everybody is doing great in this season. Getting into February, Valentine's Day coming up. Hope you got somebody that you feel excited about, on that holiday. For some people, it's just going to be another day. I get it. But love is dope. You know what I'm saying? So it can be dope, I should say. It's not dope for everybody, but it can be. So for the people that do feel good about Valentine's Day coming up, I hope you have a great one. To everybody else, it's just February 14th, Now let's talk about the Texas football team. Biggest question marks surrounding the Texas Longhorn starters in 2025. I think once I get into this, you'll figure out how this is going to go. Like I said, it's not about performance or whether they're capable or anything like that. It's just more so what is a big question kind of surrounding them in 2025. And I think I am going to start with Arch Manning, but I think like the question for Arch Manning, I want to figure out is how much will we utilize his legs in 2025? How much will his legs actually be a factor? All season this year, the thought process was, why do we have Quinn Ewers in there when he is a sitting duck in the pocket? Or Arch Manning brings something to the table that Quinn Ewers doesn't, that we're missing. And in large part, that something was his athleticism, his ability to run the ball, and his ability to move around in the pocket, right? We know that obviously his athleticism is going to be on display and he's going to be able to move around in the pocket. And there's going to be a lot of times where the coverage may break down or they don't account for Arch Manning. Maybe the coverage is really good, and he just needs to take off and he'll be able to pick up 10, 15, 20, maybe even more yards via scrambling, right? We saw that in the Georgia game. Nice little 21-yard run where everything was covered up. So he does give you that ability. That's not something that Steve Sarkisian has to game plan. That's not something that Steve Sarkisian necessarily has to account for, right? That's something you can't account for. That's just football. Like, oh, there's open grass, let me take off and run, right? But we haven't seen necessarily Steve Sarkisian with a mobile quarterback or have a game plan for a mobile quarterback. And so now something that's never really been a part of Steve Sarkisian's offense. We have to figure out how much it'll be implemented. And I think that we saw it last year, right? With like the fourth down runs. We saw a couple of those. We did see the read option where he took it for, I believe, 67 yards against not UTSA. I think that was ULM because I was at the UTSA game. Yeah, I think it was ULM where he took the run for 60 yards. So we did see obviously Steve Sarkisian incorporated a little bit into the offense, but now that he's the starter, how much of that becomes your game plan? Because obviously it's like he's not going to be Riley Leonard. Let me carry it 9 times on one drive until I throw up. Let me carry it 10 to 15 times a game like Marcel Reed or Lenore Sellers. Like obviously Arch Manning is not going to be that. He's still a very good quarterback. This is a passing offense with a power run inside, outside run element. And so, Arch Manning is capable of passing the ball. You know what I'm saying? 30 to 40 times. We don't need him to run the ball 10 to 20 times. That's not his best asset. It's just an asset that he has. And so how often or in what situations does Steve Sarkisian say, okay, I want Arch Manning to run the ball? And is it like a RPO where he has the option to take off? Is it just a pure read option where he's reading the defender? Okay, running back gets it or I keep it. Or is it a quarterback draw where from the start of the snap, Arch Manning is running it? How does he utilize Arch Manning with his legs? We know that he has the ability to use them, but how does Steve Sarkisian put that in play? I think it's going to be really interesting to see this season. Then when you look at it, like on top of that, I think it was a completely different scenario this past season when Arch Manning was your backup. Obviously Arch Manning still this season was very valuable. Somebody that you wanted to be able to come in and use in spurts. And with Quinn Ewers' injury history, you always had to reasonably assume that you would have to rely on Arch Manning at some point, which you did for a couple of games. But now Arch Manning is going to be the starter. And so how much do you want to put him in harm's way, knowing that one hit would lead to Trey Owens being your starting quarterback? You having to rely on Trey Owens to win games. And I'm not saying that at all in terms of like Trey Owens isn't capable. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is Arch Manning is the most important player on the football field by far, right? And I think it was different when, if we have Quinn go down, we got Arch Manning. And if Arch Manning goes down, now we got Trey Owens, right? Love Trey Owens. I don't think any of us think that he's Arch Manning, right? And so it's like, yeah, you can have, Arch doing these kind of short yardage runs. Maybe the quarterback sneaks, maybe putting himself in harm's way, running on the goal line. But you also have to be mindful, and we know that Steve Sarkisian will, that he is one hit away from not being in a position to play for the Texas Longhorns this season, or for missing time, whether it's 1 week or an extended period of time. So yes, Arch Manning has this superpower that the Texas offense is going to be able to tap into this season that we haven't been able to tap into in recent years. But we have to wonder going into the season, how much does Steve Sarkisian plan to utilize that? Like I said, there's going to be times where the play breaks down and Arch Manning is going to take off. That's football, right? You can't account for that. But we, as fans, right, for this offense to operate at the highest level, believe that Steve Sarkisian needs to implement Arch Manning's legs into the game plan. Once again, via the RPO, via the read option, via the designed quarterback run. And how much does Steve Sarkisian plan to add that into his bag? How much does Steve Sarkisian plan to add that into his playbook? I don't think we can assume it's just going to be a lot. I don't think we can assume it's just going to be a little. The fact is, we don't know. So I think that's the biggest question mark surrounding Arch Manning in 2025 is how much does Steve Sarkisian plan to use Arch Manning's legs in a designed format? All right, quick word from our sponsors, and then I want to talk about Cedric Baxter coming off of a major knee injury, right? Tearing multiple ligaments in his knee. Are we sure that Cedric Baxter is just going to step in and be one of the best running backs in the country? We discuss after the break. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by TurboTax. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. If you need to know how to spell that, I just thought about this, didn't think about it yesterday. TurboTax.com/guarantees. That's GUARANTEES. Guarantees. All right. So, yeah, this obviously is going to be a two-part episode when you spend 10 minutes talking about Arch Manning. But, I mean, you're going to spend 10 minutes talking about anybody, all right? I guess either one. I guess he's going to be the one you talk about for 10 minutes. So, yeah, I guess I'll talk about the defense tomorrow. Sorry. Defense always getting the short end of the stick. It's funny, like I said, because they always in the big games are the ones that showing up. And it's like, I'll get to the defense tomorrow, So Cedric Baxter, right? I think that losing Cedric Baxter this year had a huge impact on our running game, right? What we've always been able to see with Steve Sarkisian. Now, granted, when you got, just in his recent history, like the Najee Harrises of the world, the Bijan Robinson, the Roshan Johnsons of the world, Jonathan Brooks, who was clearly the best running back in college football before he tore his ACL. Then he tore it again. I mean, just prayers out to that brother, my namesake. You're always going to have one of the best rushing offenses in the country. And then you expected Cedric Baxter to be that next guy, right? And I thought that he came on a little bit. I mean, obviously you had Jonathan Brooks, and so Cedric Baxter was just going to be a nice change of pace back for you. But I thought he got better over the course of the season, right? And then he really stepped into that role where it was just him and Jaden Blue, and they looked like a nice two-headed monster down the stretch, and they looked good in the Washington game. Just had those two key fumbles. But then Cedric Baxter gets hurt in the offseason, and he won't play a football game until September. I believe the game against Ohio State is in September, if not the last week of August. And the last time he played a football game, Michael Penix Jr. was in college, right? Like the next time that Cedric Baxter plays a football game, Michael Penix Jr. will be going into his second year in the National Football League, right? And he had a major knee injury. This wasn't he had a major knee injury. Like, he didn't sprain his MCL. He didn't have a concussion. Like, he tore ligaments in his knee, right? And I was watching a clip either last night or the night before, and it was Derrick Rose. Like, it was just a reel on social media, but it was Derrick Rose, and he was talking about how from the moment he tore his ACL for the rest of his career until he retired, he dealt with pain. And I think sometimes, me included, right? It's not a shot at anybody. I think sometimes, me included, we can look at these players and say, oh, he's just going to be hurt. He'll be back. Oh, he's just going to miss a year, but he'll be back and be fine. He'll be the same player. Like, DeMarvion Overshown has now torn, his knee up like twice, like multiple ligaments in his knee. And it's like, you have to wonder, will he ever be the same player? Yes, he'll be able to come back and play, but will he ever be the same player? I'm a Cowboys fan. I remember when Jalen Smith had that nerve damage. Like, he had a run, but he was never the same player that he was at Notre Dame. And so, like I said, sometimes as fans, we can assume like it's Madden or it's like, NCAA 25. And I know most of us play with the injuries off anyway, but if you don't, you know what I'm saying? Like, oh, okay, he just misses this certain period of time and then he comes back and he's going to be 100%. We don't know that about Cedric Baxter. And, I think the thought process is that he's just going to come back and be one of the best running backs in the country. And hopefully so. He certainly is going to be one of the most talented. But when you tear your knee up like that, it's not just about the recovery time frame, right? Like, once again, do you ever even have the same movement that you had before in that knee? The same ability to cut, the same ability to juke, the same agility, the same acceleration, the same speed. You have to wonder if you have that. But on top of that, how long does it take Cedric Baxter to be comfortable being the same player that he was before that injury? When the first time he's really going to be able to test it out, I mean, I know that you're going to have scrimmages and things. He's not going to play in the spring game, obviously. So the first time he's really going to have to test it out is against Ohio State. And what happens if it takes Cedric Baxter, I don't want to say a year, but weeks, maybe months to feel like his old self, coming off of tearing multiple ligaments in his knee? We can't assume that he's just going to go out there and beat Cedric Baxter against Ohio State week 1. And I feel like that's kind of like the thought process. Well, we get Cedric Baxter back. Yes. But my question is, what version of Cedric Baxter do we get? And how long does it take, if ever, for Cedric Baxter to be the same player that he was? Now, he's still very young, right? Not a lot of tread on those tires. You assume that he'll be able to be fine with modern medicine and everything like that. I mean, I've seen Kevin Durant tear his Achilles and average 27 points a game since. Right? You know what I'm saying? So, speaking of the Longhorns, like, modern medicine is amazing. But I just think that we need to maybe at least ask the question or temper our expectations for Cedric Baxter a little bit, and worry about who's number 2 and who's number 3 and how we're going to carry that running game. Because like I said, for me, it's just hard to believe that Cedric Baxter will just be able to step back in week 1 against Ohio State and be the same running back that was deemed the number 1 player in his class, or be the same player that looked like one of the best running backs in the country down the stretch of the 2023 season and coming into the 2024 season. Yes, I believe he'll get back to that point. Absolutely. But like I said, I'm just not sure that he'll be there week 1 when that's his first game action in almost 2 seasons, right? So that's my question about Cedric Baxter. Ryan Wingo. Ryan Wingo is going to be a big part of the offense starting earlier in the season. You had Isaiah Bond, you had Matthew Golden, you were sprinkling in Jonte Cook and DeAndre Moore, but it felt like from the jump, Ryan Wingo, a part of that amazing true freshman wide receiver class, by the way. I mean, you had Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State, you had Ryan Williams at Alabama, you had the dude at Clemson, you know what I'm saying, that was making plays against us. Obviously, we had Ryan Wingo. They had a couple of them boys at Auburn that was true freshmen that was making plays. Like, I mean, yeah, it was just like the true freshman wide receiver class. Like, so, and I was expecting 3 years, you probably going to see, a lot of wide receivers taken in the first and second round. Cause I mean, there was a lot of them balling as soon as they got on the field, right? And Ryan Wingo was kind of like that. You know what I'm saying? 55-yard runs, 75-yard receptions, touchdowns. He was like, damn, he might be the number 1 wide receiver by the end of the season. And then I just think over the course of the season, maybe he hit the freshman wall. I'm not sure. Maybe they just didn't go to him as much. But he certainly tailed off a little bit. But coming into next season with the experience that he's had, playing for a playoff team, being a part of the game plan every week, whether he was dominating or not, with his frame, being 6'2", over 200 pounds, him playing on the outside a lot, you would expect that he should step into that role of number 1 wide receiver, right? I look at DeAndre Moore as more of a slot guy. Obviously he could play outside, but I think he does, work better, more inside, quick passes, screens, short routes, kind of, maybe medium routes over the middle of the field, go deep occasionally, but I think he's more of your slot guy, right? Get the ball in his hands quick and let him make something happen. I think Ryan Wingo is your one-on-one guy outside, should be able to win against any coverage, any matchup. And yeah, you're going to have some 5-star wide receivers coming in, but you just never know, especially on a team like Texas that's competing for a national championship, how much you can just rely on a true freshman, or how much do you want to go to? Well, yeah, I guess how much do you want to rely on a true freshman? Now, maybe, Jamie French, Khalil Locker, or Michael Terry, maybe one of them come in, maybe 2 of them come in, and they're just like head and shoulders better than everybody else, like a Ryan Williams or a Jeremiah Smith. It's like, we have to get him on the field. Maybe that's the case, but you just can't assume that a true freshman is going to come in and be dominant, right? Then you got guys like Parker Livingstone. Maybe it's Parker Livingstone's time to step up right after sitting for a year. So right now, we really don't know who 3, 4, 5, etc. are going to be in that wide receiver core right now. And we still could go hit the portal as well, right? Maybe Silas Bolden steps into one of those roles. But to me, when I'm looking at the makeup of this wide receiver room right now, I think Ryan Wingo has to be the guy. And so the question mark is, can he be the guy, right? Can he be the guy that you're now relying on to catch 80 plus passes in a season, go for, 1,000 plus yards in a season, 1,000 plus yards in a season, catch 10 plus touchdowns in a season, but more importantly, be that guy for Arch Manning whenever he needs to make a play? Can Ryan Wingo be that guy on the outside that when it's man coverage, zone coverage, when they're blitzing, when it's a zone blitz, when it's a man blitz, when they're pressing, when it's first down, when it's second down, when it's third down, when you're in the red zone, when it's fourth down, when you need a play, can Ryan Wingo be that guy that wins in any scenario? Can Ryan Wingo be that guy that when the defense knows you're going to Ryan Wingo, when the offense knows you're going to Ryan Wingo, when everybody in the stadium knows that you're going to Ryan Wingo, can he be that guy that still makes a play, right? As of right now, looking at this wide receiver core and the makeup of it going into next season, I would expect that he's the prime candidate for that. So can he turn into that player in his sophomore year? Once again, where whenever Arch Manning needs to make a crucial play, when everybody in the stadium knows the ball is going to Ryan Wingo, can he still be the one to get it open, catch the ball, and make a play for the Texas Longhorns? I'm looking forward to see if he can make that maturation next year in his sophomore year, because he certainly has all the talent in the world, and he is very capable of being that player. Can he take that next step? We certainly hope so for the Texas Longhorns. A quick word from our sponsors, and then I want to talk about the offensive line a little bit. When you're replacing a lot of players on the offensive line, obviously there's going to be some question marks about that going into next season. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns also brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. But live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, an official partner of Super Bowl 59. It makes sense for the Cowboys to make their triumphant return to the Super Bowl in Super Bowl 60, right? Like, Super Bowl 60 just sounds grand. So it's like, it would make sense for the Cowboys to go to that one. And then, I said this on the show yesterday. Lions hadn't made the NFC Championship game in a long time. Then they do it 2 years ago. Season before this one. Commanders hadn't made it to the NFC Championship game in a long time. They make the NFC Championship this year. It's setting up for the Cowboys to make the Super Bowl in Super Bowl 60. You see, I got my old Cowboys shirt on, Prime Zeke. It's setting up. Remember where you heard it first. I'm not a huge believer in Brian Schottenheimer, but I'm just saying it's in the cards. Super Bowl 60. That just sounds grand. It just sounds like the Cowboys should be there against the Chiefs as Patrick Mahomes goes for 4 in a row. We'll see. But anyways, I want to talk about the offensive line. I want to talk about 2 players on the offensive line that I have question marks about. I think one is Trevor Goosby. And I thought that, we saw him come in against Texas A&M and hold his own. But then we saw him against Georgia. And I mean, our seasoned players, struggled against Georgia. No doubt. There's definitely no shame to Trevor Goosby for not having a great game against Georgia, and then we've seen him in spot duty, right? Or like, we're taking our starters out the game. But obviously when you got him coming in against teams like Colorado State and ULM and things like that, you would still expect him to dominate even in those scenarios. So, Trevor Goosby looks like a good player, right? He looks like a good option at left tackle. Will he be Kelvin Banks? Probably not, but he doesn't need to be Kelvin Banks, especially in an offense that gets the ball out of their hands very quickly. Now, I expect Arch Manning to hold on to it a little bit more because he's going to utilize the deep ball a lot more than Quinn Ewers did. But still, this is a, kind of a yak, throw a lot of screens, quick pass offense, and that's going to help the offensive line a lot because there's less time that you have to block. So he doesn't need to be Kelvin Banks to still be a really good left tackle for this college football team, Texas football team. And make no mistake about it, Kelvin Banks is one of the greatest offensive linemen, one of the greatest players to ever come through the University of Texas. He's going to be a top 10 to top 15 draft pick. So you obviously can't just pull a Kelvin Banks out of every recruiting cycle, right? But when you are replacing somebody who is a legend, and I know I don't want to throw the word legend around, right? But like I said, he's one of the greatest to ever play right, at the University of Texas. Even though he didn't win a championship, like we who watched Kelvin Banks from the moment he was a true freshman step onto the scene and be one of the best linemen in the country, we should appreciate it as such. He was a legend at the University of Texas. Can Trevor Goosby come in and fill those footsteps? I mean, fill those, is it footsteps or fill those shoes? I don't know. Follow in his footsteps, fill those shoes. Okay. For 3 years, Quinn Ewers really never had to worry about who was coming off the left side. Like, you just kind of figure, okay, Kelvin Banks has got it. Like, he's taken care of. Cam Williams, I might have to worry about. But Kelvin Banks is taking care. He's over there holding his own, right? So will Trevor Goosby be able to provide that same or enough quality left tackle play to where Arch Manning does not have to worry about the left side of the offensive line or the right side of the defensive line? Because once a quarterback gets sped up, once a quarterback starts having to worry about, damn, there's going to be some pressure coming, that completely changes their comfortability level and that completely changes their level of play, right? So like I said, Trevor Goosby does not have to be Kelvin Banks. There's going to be a lot of left tackles that come through the University of Texas that simply won't be Kelvin Banks. But will he be a quality enough left tackle to where that is a position you don't have to worry about, right? They always say that when you're not saying the offensive linemen's names, it's probably a good sign, right? And I don't know if we've seen enough of Trevor Goosby to definitively say, oh, yeah, we'll be fine at left tackle. I think he's a good player. I think we'll be okay. But that is a question mark, right? Will we be fine at left tackle? Will left tackle still be a strength for the Texas Longhorns going into next season? That's a question mark with Trevor Goosby that he has to answer once football starts. The next thing is I think center is probably maybe the most undervalued position in sports. And when you have a center like Jake Majors, who started almost 60 games at Texas, it may have been over 60. I got to look, but like if he didn't, it was almost 60. I mean, that's essentially like having another quarterback on the field. I mean, that's essentially like Jason Kelsey for the Eagles. You can't understate how much Jake Majors meant to this team. There is not a shift, a defensive front, a blitz, anything that Jake Majors has not seen in his time at the University of Texas. It's literally like having another quarterback on the field, the leader of the offensive line. This may sound crazy because Kelvin Banks is all world. I think Jake Majors is going to be harder to replace than Kelvin Banks. You had a center with almost 60 games of experience starting. And it's not just the experience. It's not just the IQ. He was a damn good football player as well in the pass and in the run. I'm a Cowboys fan. Since we've lost Travis Frederick, that offensive line has never been the same. It's never been the same since we lost Travis Frederick. It's just something about having that guy in the middle. You look at the Chiefs, Creed Humphrey, right? Like that's one player that never gets talked about on the Chiefs, but he's one of their best players. He's the reason that they are really, really good, right? Because you got Creed Humphrey in there at center. Look at the Ravens. I think they got Tyler Linderbaum. Like it's always the teams. You look at the Eagles, they got Juergens, right? Like these teams that have really good centers, it's just a very undervalued position. And you're talking about a guy that started almost 60 games, and now he's not there anymore. And I'm not even sure who you're going to replace him with. But man, it's going to be hard to replace everything that Jake Majors brought, even if he's stronger than Jake Majors. even if he's more athletic than Jake Majors, even if he's better at using his hands than Jake Majors, it's just still it's just still an aspect to the game that you're losing with Jake Majors, with as much football as he's played, as much as he's seen, as many times as he's been on the field, all the different moments he's been on the field, like I said, all the different shifts, the fronts, the blitzes, the disguises that he's seen and been able to point out. You're just not going to have that with your new center. That takes time. Like I said, he could be more of a physical specimen than Jake Majors, but it's still going to take time for anybody to reach the level that Jake Majors was able to reach at the University of Texas. And I don't know if anybody ever will, because like I said, he started almost 60 games. You just don't see that in college football. And we're losing a lot in Jake Majors. Regardless of the talent level of the player that comes in, we are losing a hell of a lot in Jake Majors at the center position. Like I said, probably the most undervalued position in sports. Will the new center be able to follow in his footsteps? We can only hope. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day, defense tomorrow. I got y'all. Hook 'em. Peace.